What's up, and welcome to Unmotive Show with me, Rotimi. Today we have Frank King with us. Frank has been an 11-time TED Talk speaker on mental health. He's also a former writer from The Tonight Show. These days, he is a TED Talk coach and coaches people on how to make money speaking, in addition to being a suicide prevention speaker, outspoken on the subjects of depression and suicide. It's a pleasure having you with us today, Frank.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I was very interested to have you on the show because you're a comedian and you have lived experience with depression and suicide, and you work it into your career. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do with this show this season. Could you tell us more about how this all started with you and also how you became a comedian?
Well, I started in fourth grade. I told a joke. Kids laughed. Teacher was so hysterical she had to go to the teacher's lounge to recover. And I decided I'm going to be a comedian. And then 12th grade, there was a talent show. Nobody had ever done stand-up before. This is 1975. I did stand-up, won the talent show. Of course, I beat the folk dancers and the accordion player. But still, it's a win. And I told my mama, I'm going to be a comedian. I'm going to LA. And she goes, you're going to college first. She said, I don't care what you do when you get done, when you graduate. You can be a goat herder for all I care. But you're going to be a goat herder with a college degree. So I went to Carolina, picked up a couple of degrees, and then headed for the West Coast. Started my comedy career at the Comedy Store in San Diego, a branch of the one in LA. April Fool's Day, 1984. A year and a half later, said to my girlfriend, now my wife of 37 years, I'm going on the road to be a professional stand-up comedian. Do you want to come along for the ride? Figuring she'd go, oh, hell no. And she goes, yeah. So we gave up our jobs and our apartment and hit the road. We were on the road with no home for 2,629 nights in a row, 7 years and change nonstop. Worked with Rosie and Ellen and Foxworthy and Ron White and Adam Sandler, Kevin James, Steve Harvey, opened up with the Beach Boys, Randy Travis. It was a great tour. And then came off the road to do a little radio, a morning show in my old hometown of Raleigh, North Carolina. And then made the jump to corporate comedy. After dinner, after lunch. People go, what's the difference between a corporate comic and a club comic? About $5,000 a night plus travel. I'm no math major, but that made sense. However, I always wanted to make a living and a difference. I could never figure out how, what I had to teach anybody. And then in April of 2010, after filing Chapter 7 bankruptcy, I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger. A friend of mine came up after a keynote. Hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? I go, hey, man, could you try to sound slightly less disappointed? I realized that I could keynote on suicide prevention. The next hurdle, I've been doing stand-up for 2.5 decades. Who's going to take me serious? So I did a TED Talk on suicide prevention and proved to everybody I could cover a serious topic with humor. And that was my first TEDx talk in 2014. And I've been doing an average of a little over one a year since then, all on mental health, one aspect or another. Each one builds my brand as a mental health comedian. That's how I got into it. That's how I built the business with the help of TEDx.
Wow. So, that's amazing. TED, I know TED kind of covers a lot of modern subjects. So I guess it's because mental health is becoming more, in the forefront of people's minds and in the media, they're covering it more. And that's great. You were able to get on the train with that, and get right up there and do it.
Yeah, sadly, it's a growth industry. When I started speaking on it in 2014, my first TED, 39,000 people in the U.S. died by suicide. Last year, a little over 49,000 died by suicide, one every 9 minutes. So it's getting worse, not better. I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah, wow, those are startling numbers. I had no idea those numbers were that high.
Yeah, and I picked half dozen industries in the U.S. that have a really high rate of suicide. Construction has the highest rate, generally. Roughly 1,000 people die by accident every year in construction, and 5,000 die by suicide. They're 5 times more likely to jump off the building than fall off of it. So it's just, they've got a serious problem, and they're working on bringing the rate down.
Right on. Yeah. I mean, like, never. And also, so I know you know of a few stars that, like, I know you talked about Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade. Could you tell us a little more about some famous people and, like, notable people who have mental illness and also maybe some other problems like suicide in their lineage?
Yes, I think I believe that my depression and thoughts of suicide are simply the flip side of my creativity and imagination, which is why you see so many people in creative industries, businesses, entertainers. In Kate Spade's case, she was a designer. Anthony Bourdain, fabulous, famous chef. I did a TED talk, my fourth one, called "Suicide: The Secret of My Success." Dead man talking, because in 1984, January, I realized that I was unhappily married, although she's a wonderful woman, selling insurance, great business, not for me. And I wasn't going to amateur night because my first wife didn't like the idea. And I realized if I didn't change something and quick, I was going to kill myself. My second thought was, well, I could divorce my wife, quit my job, try comedy. If it works, great. If it doesn't, hell, I can still kill myself. So I think Anthony Bourdain had a very similar experience because he was going to Vassar, and I don't know what his major was, but it wasn't culinary. And his folks had taken him to France, and when he was 8 years old, and he fell in love with food. All through high school, he worked at a couple of restaurants. In college, even, he was working at a couple of restaurants. He really liked culinary. My guess is he finally said to himself, "Look, Vassar's a great school. I'm sure I'll get a decent job when I get out of here, but this is not for me. If I don't change something, I'll start pursuing culinary, which is where I think I belong. I'm going to kill myself." And I think Kate Spade had a great job at one of the big fashion magazines, covering other people's fashions. She was the accessories editor, I think, at Vanity Fair or one of those. And my guess is she said to herself, "Look, I'm not supposed to be reviewing other people's creations. I'm supposed to be designing them myself. And if I don't quit and do that, follow my passion, I'm going to kill myself." I'm assuming that was the case because I met a number of people who had the same basic thought process. I don't like what I'm doing. I know what I should be doing. And if I don't do it, I'm going to kill myself. So,
Yeah, that's can you hear me?
yeah.
Okay, your camera just went out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I guess there's I'm trying to remember the name of the artist. So have you heard the artist? He paints the picture with the the man that goes like this.
Oh, the Scream? Uh,
Yeah, the Scream.
yeah, I can't think of who the
He's
artist.
also had a mental illness, and he like had a there's a story about him. He like went to a prostitute's house and gave her his ear or something. He cut off his own ear and gave it to her or something, and that was like part of his mental illness.
Well, look at
Forget his
Kanye
name.
West. Look at
Uh,
Kanye West. I mean, politics aside, he's undoubtedly one of the musical geniuses of his generation. Unfortunately,
yeah,
he's not a public relations genius, but he is definitely a musical genius. I think oftentimes people with the mental challenge. I did my third TED talk was called "Mental with Benefits: The Evolutionary Advantages of Mental Illness," because I kept bumping into people who had a mental illness but had some other fabulous talent. I thought this cannot be a coincidence. So, and turns out there are connections between mental illness and, again, oftentimes creative professionals.
yeah. I was actually a regionally recognized skateboarder. I was in magazines and contests all up in California, and also like an international magazine called Thrasher. And people were saying I was going to go pro, and later on, I actually got injured. But I was always people always called me crazy for the tricks I was doing because I was always doing like big gaps and stairs and doing tricks over them and stuff, and people would always call me crazy. So it's a little ironic to me now that I have a mental illness myself. Sometimes I blame the people. I'm like, why did you call me crazy? Maybe it's your fault I have a mental illness or something. But it's really I'm just being a little facetious. But
No, it's. I do believe it's. I seriously believe that my depression, suicidal thoughts are just the flip side of my creativity and imagination. I mean, there's a reason why when somebody heckled me in a comedy club that I could fire back, and people would often say, "How'd you think that up?" And I said to them, look, I didn't think it. When you heard it, I heard it for the first time. I have no idea where that came from. It just
Right.
came, a young woman being thrown out. She'd been a problem all night, really drunk. Finally decided to throw her out. She's on her way out the door. She starts turning back toward me. The joke I wrote was she probably heard something that sounded like her name because drunks are voice activated. And she screamed, F you. And I said to her, not even for practice. And I got a standing ovation. And people asked me, how'd you come up with that? I have no idea. It came screaming out of the back of my head. I have no idea where that came from.
Yeah, that's a classic one. FU. Wait, so what was it? FU, and then you said not even for practice.
Not even for practice.
Yeah, that's a
And
classic. That's a
I'd
classic.
never said that before. It wasn't something I'd heard. It was just, it just, I have no idea where it came from. But I tell people I can teach you to write stand up and perform stand up. What I cannot teach you to do is process the incoming information the way my neurodiverse brain does. That creates things like that. I work with speakers, and I was working with a guy who he did a study on depression and altitude, and I don't know the results indicated there may be a connection between how what the altitude is where you are, like Denver's a mile high, and and depression. And I said, well, yeah, so it's not really your attitude, it's your altitude. And he goes, Frank, dear God, I've been doing this 40 years. That thought never crossed my mind. I go, well, can't tell you. Just my brain just works that way. So
Yeah, I've heard that saying before. Actually, maybe you came up with it. He's like he made it. He coined it after that. You coined it.
yeah, and
Yeah.
he never
So
thought it.
yeah, yeah. So I understand you have a little mental illness in your family as well, like past history of suicide. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, more nuts in my family than in a squirrel turd. The It's called generational depression and suicide. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days. I mean, it was horrific. And again, I myself. And if you're that close to an actual suicide, and when you hear the story, it's in my first TED talk. You'll realize nobody could get any closer. If you're already hardwired for it, it means that probably later in life you'll seriously consider taking your own life. And I did. I was going to kill myself.
Wow. Yeah. So how do you make so one of my goals for this show was to make the third season was to make talking about mental health fun. I feel like that's what we've been doing a little bit here, but maybe you could give me some tips about how to make mental health more fun to talk about, maybe in jokes or just making humor out of it. I don't even know if it's humor. It's more like real life, nitty gritty.
It's dark humor, and it's not
Yeah,
jokes.
dark.
I tell people this when I'm doing my keynote. I go, look, there's no jokes, nothing to joke about, but there are funny personal anecdotes. A friend of mine called me. He was late calling. He said, I hope I didn't leave you hanging. I said, would you like to rephrase that? Oh, a meeting planner called me. I'm speaking. I said, what do you want me to cover, Michelle? She knows I put a gun in my mouth. She goes, I don't know, just give me some bullet points. So I just let that hang in the air. And she goes, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And relax, Michelle. It was just too good to let go by. So it's just funny, personal. When I did my TED talk, I looked up suicide on the TED.com site to see how other people handled it. Figuring there'd be dozens of talks. There were 3. So I said to the audience in my first TEDx, there were 3. And then I said to myself, well, duh. If you're really good at suicide, you're not going to be around to record a TEDx talk. And later in my talk, I said, my grandmother killed herself with an old gas stove. My great aunt with an old Loctite refrigerator. What is it with my family and major appliances? I go by Home Depot, I tear up. So it's just funny, personal stories, real life stories that they call it comic relief for a reason. It's a really
Right.
difficult subject.
Well, I've also heard. I don't know exactly how the saying went, but it was like something like the crying clown, right? So, comedians are scarred, and they have a really. Sometimes they're like hurting inside too, and stuff like that. And that's how the best comedians live have lived. You know, I don't know if you've heard that before.
Well, comedy is supposedly tragedy plus time, and
Is
tragedy plus time.
oh, tragedy plus time.
Yeah, and the longer you do comedy, the shorter the time between the tragedy and the comedy. I had a heart attack. I was in the woods with my dogs, just me and the dogs. I was half a mile up a logging trail. I had T-Mobile, so I didn't have cell service. So I had to get back down the trail, get the dogs loaded, drive 2 miles home. Anyway, I end up at the hospital, obviously. Great thing about having a heart attack is when you get to the hospital, no waiting. So I'm in a little triage unit in a great deal of pain. But the nurse says to me, "Listen, Frank, I got to ask you a question." And through the pain, I said to her, "I'm married, honey, but I love the way you think." She starts trying not to laugh. She goes, "No, no. Your full name is Frank Marshall King III. But what do you like to be called?" Through the pain, I said, "Big Daddy." So to this day, when I go back to Oregon Heart and Vascular and I see somebody from that morning, "Hey, Big Daddy, how's it hanging?" So, yeah, the longer you do comedy, the shorter. I was doing comedy in real time having a heart attack.
Yeah, that's well, at least you got a good nickname there. It's like T-Bone, you know.
Yeah, it's so that's yeah, and there's a higher rate of suicide among comedians apparently, and
Oh,
I mean, and again, I think it has something to do with the fact that they're comedians because they may have a little mental challenge, and and my third, the mental with benefits. The idea was starts like this: what if those of us living with a mental illness are not living with a genetic mutation, but an amazing evolutionary adaptation? What if it's like, as Malcolm Gladwell says in his book, David and Goliath, a desirable disadvantage? You never wish it on anybody, but it comes with certain advantages. And there are other things in life physically that actually, the in the Caribbean, anybody who has sickle cell anemia cannot get malaria. So it's probably an evolutionary development. The body somehow created sickle cell to immunize people against malaria. I'm not. I think I'd rather have malaria, to tell you the truth. But there are other things in nature where what appears to be a disadvantage can also have advantages. People who are dyslexic have better peripheral vision. They have an amazing ability to spot the anomaly in anything. In my TEDx, I said, "Don't ever play Where's Waldo with a dyslexic for money because you're going to lose because they're going to spot Waldo immediately." So it's that whole talks about that. What's the advantage of bipolar? What's the advantage of ADHD? Like that.
yeah, I think I remember there was someone who said it's like it's not the X-Men, it's the Xanax Men. That was
That
a pretty good one.
I think that was mine actually.
Yeah. Oh, that was yours. Yeah, and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
there's also I've heard that in Native American culture, actually people with mental illness were thought of as being able to speak to like God or like the spirits, you know. So that's another one
Well, and in
from
a number of
culture.
Native American in a number of Native American cultures, being gay was celebrated because they believed that you had the qualities and abilities of both a man and a woman. It wasn't they weren't outcasts for that reason. They like mental illness. They thought it was something special. You were endowed with something that they didn't have.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one. I haven't heard that one. There's a whole. The other one I heard was that I wrote a book once. I wrote a short story once about. Actually, no, I read it in a book. I was like, I didn't write the book, but it was probably like the spirits, the fish. It's just an anecdote about spirits. When people die, they become spirits, animal spirits, or something like
Yeah.
that. So
Yep.
I'm into all that, you know. So like the different ways cultures look at this spiritual life and the differences between our cultures now. Um, so what about comedy in the past? Like, how do you think comics were developed in past cultures?
Uh, you know, in the Jewish culture, back in the day, there were a large number of Jewish comics, still are, and I think it has something to do with suffering because they've they've always been picked on wherever they happen to be,
Mm.
and sometimes with tragic results. So I think that struggle. There's something to be said for the struggle. Some of the best jokes I've written have come from frustration over something. Something went wrong, missed a flight, or the rent a car broke down, or or you're divorced. The punchlines are in the pain. That's the secret is turning the punchlines into the pain. And in speaking, I tell my students, look, turn the pain into passion, the passion into purpose, and the purpose into profit.
Purpose into profits. Just remember the last part.
Yeah,
that's
because they got some tragic.
That's the kicker.
Yeah, they got some tragic stories. Someone else said, "Yeah, I had a suicide attempt." Hey, that's money in the bank, baby.
Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit more about how you got all your TED Talks? Like how'd that come about?
It's the first one I did. I got invited to the next two. They contacted me and asked me if I had any more mental health topics, and I applied for the remaining. And what it's come down to, I believe, is creativity, because they get a couple hundred applications. So whatever you put on that app better be creative, better get the attention. It's a marketing pitch to the selection committee.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a couple of them I didn't even have to audition for. They liked the title and subtitle so much. My favorite was Mental Health and the Orgasm, Treat Your Depression Single-Handedly. And they called me and said, no, you don't have to audition. You're on. And it's the only one I've ever got a standing ovation for. The tagline was, I love my iPhone, but it's my second favorite handheld device.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I can imagine that killed the crowd.
Yeah, I got a standing
No,
ovation. And so
yeah,
with my clients, we try to create title, subtitle that are really clever. Something's going to catch
yeah,
their attention.
yeah. That's definitely one that's like modern and contemporary, and just speaks to everything that's going on right now too. It's kind of like ubiquitous.
Yeah, sex and mental illness and humor. I mean, it had everything. It was at the end of it. I said to the audience, "Do you know why they call an orgasm an orgasm?" And they're looking at me like, "No." And I went, "Because nobody can spell." And I got a standing ovation.
Wow, that's yeah. You always think that TED Talks are always like smart or like intelligent. I guess that's intelligent comedy, but like maybe a little to the left.
Well, there is science behind the fact having an orgasm raises your DHEA levels, lowers cortisol. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to the body, um, for masturbation, orgasm, um, and prostate cancer. The statistic was men who self pleasure more than 21 times a month have a 20% lower rate of prostate cancer. So I said to the audience, if 21 a month is the threshold, right this moment, I am immortal. Um, and the committee said, you need an action item for that. I said, do you think I need to encourage men to do this? I said, okay. I said to the audience, so I got an action item for you, fellas. Beat that thing like it owes you money.
So that was the action item, huh?
Yeah, oh
the,
yeah.
the committee suggested you needed an action item for that.
Yeah, I thought, well, I'll fix them. I'll give them an action item.
Yeah, that's an easy sell, I guess.
Well, they asked me, "Do you have a PowerPoint presentation?" I go, "Where am I going to get Where am I going to get slides for a presentation on masturbation orgasm? Pornhub?"
Did you end up using any slides or?
No, I faked like I was. I go, "Ladies and gentlemen, click click money shot, click click pearl necklace," and there were a few ZZ Top fans in the audience who laughed at that. Nobody else got it, but
Yeah,
I faked. I had a couple slides, and yeah, again, it was the best. It's probably the best one I've ever done.
that's cool. That's cool. Um, that's pretty interesting. We did have a podcast about sex and porn with which talked about like Pornhub and OnlyFans, especially the new one that's out, the new kid on the block. So we were talking all about that, but It was more of a serious tone, I guess, because it was about porn addictions and sex
Yeah,
addictions.
yeah. I
So
mean,
there's that other side of it.
if we'd had Pornhub when I was 16, I probably never would have left my house again. I mean, free porn. What a country. Um, yeah, somebody said, "Well, like the video is like 6 to 8 minutes." And I mean, you need more than that. Come on.
Yeah. So you also wrote for the Tonight Show. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How it was writing for the Tonight Show? How you got the job? How it ended?
Yeah, it was Jay Leno was a permanent guest host for Johnny, and Johnny would pull up on a Friday night and tell his staff he wasn't going to be there. He's going to take a vacation week next week. So that meant Jay had 4 nights, 18 jokes a night to do in the monologue. So he started hiring road comics like me to submit jokes. Back then they called fax writers. So I'd crank out a dozen, 2 dozen jokes a day and send them in. And I was averaging a couple a week. And then Jay got the job for real. And he let most of the contract labor go, but some of us got to stick around. And we were with Jay until he left for CNBC.
This was Johnny Carson.
No, Johnny was gone. Jay took over, and when Jay took over, he kept some of the fax writers like me.
Oh,
He
okay.
let a lot of them go. But I wrote for him until he left in 2010, 11, 12, something like that, to go to
Yeah, I remember
CNBC.
that. Yeah, I used to watch a lot of late night television for sure. So I probably heard some of your jokes. So I
You
definitely was, yeah,
probably did.
probably heard some of your jokes.
Yep. And Jay's a nice guy. When I had my first open heart surgery, when I got out of ICU and into a regular room, Leno was the first person to call me. I thought it was rather nice because he was already doing the Tonight Show. I mean, pretty busy, but it took time out of his day to call me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's like, I guess that's how it rolls in the entertainment industry. You never know who you'll be your best friend, I guess.
Well, A is very friendly. B, he just likes doing things for other people and no benefit to himself. Just does it because he can. And when I co-wrote 4 books on men's mental health with 2 other people, and the 4th book, I contacted him and asked if he would write a blurb for the cover, and he did to help us, the marketing. So nice guy.
Right on. Yeah, that's amazing. That's kind of like I'm trying to do that more often, but it's kind of tough for me, being kind of on the depressive end myself. So I imagine he's a really upbeat guy. He probably is like, probably not depressive side. It feels like he.
No, I don't think so. Of course, you never tell. We hide it very well. Nobody knew I was depressed and suicidal until I did my first TED talk and came out on stage and told people. My wife didn't even know. So we covered up very well.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I covered up well, but definitely when people hear lately, I've been telling more people about it, but they don't seem surprised.
Oh, well, and I mean it's we're good actors generally, can act like everything's okay. I
Yeah,
think Robin Williams acted like everything's okay until it wasn't.
yeah. Robin
I
Williams
believe
was another. Yeah,
I
what
believe he
was
was
he?
living with bipolar disorder.
Oh, bipolar disorder.
I'm guessing,
Oh,
he's so manic at times, and he was self-medicating, I think, with drugs and alcohol, and just finally got to where he had some sort of Parkinson's-like illness there at the end. It was robbing him of his memory and some of his physical abilities, and I think that plus he had open heart surgery, very depressing, and I think it just finally all piled in on him, and he took his life.
yeah. That was a sad one. Yeah, and same
Yep.
thing with Anthony Bourdain. I almost had the chance to go see him in live and in on stage, and I missed the chance. And then just right after that, I heard he passed away. I didn't even
Yeah.
know until later.
Yeah. Brilliant. Kate Spade hanged herself with one of her own scarves, which I thought was an interesting joke.
Wow, Yeah, and these stories, they're so it's it's almost like something that everybody has to endure in life is death or like the other side, and like it seems like sometimes people who commit suicide are rushing towards it like wholeheartedly, like okay, let me let me at it. Maybe they have a
Well,
little bit of courage.
yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand because they'll say to me, why would somebody like Anthony Bourdain, who has everything to live for, want to kill himself? And what I tell them is, look, most people, to my mind, who are suicidal don't want to kill themselves. I didn't want to kill myself. I just wanted to end the pain. So
Mm,
I'm guessing that was the case with Anthony and Kate Spade and a lot. I think most people just want to end the pain.
right, right. So I think I wanted to get into a little bit about like I know Anthony Bourdain had a few problems with drugs. I think he was sober for a while when he actually passed away. But how do you think like drug use and stuff like that, stuff mostly drug use, has to play into suicide? Because I know that's like a lot of people who are alcoholics have that suicide probably higher rates. I don't know the exact statistics, but definitely it's probably plays a part into what you're talking about, the wanting to take the pain away.
Well, I think a lot of people who have mental illness self medicate drugs and alcohol. So they weren't necessarily an alcoholic, but they were trying to self medicate for the mental illness. Johnny Manziel, turns out he had bipolar disorder,
Right.
and he treated it with beer for years. And it's a good short term solution, but not a long term solution. So he finally got treatment, but I believe he achieved all he achieved because again, the mental illness plus the mental ableness, the bipolar disorder. You're charismatic and energetic and don't need a lot of sleep and take inspired risks. And when they pay off, you look like a genius. And I think he rode the upside of bipolar, as long as he could, and then crashed and burned.
Yeah, the side effects.
And
So,
I got about a minute before I got to jump to my next one. So,
oh, do you want to talk about your book?
oh yes, it's called Guts, Grit, and the Grind. Guts, Grit, and the Grind. There are four volumes. It's men's mental health. It's 12 guys each volume. Each guy has a problem, and each guy talks about how he's coping with it. We're hoping men will pick it up who have the same problem and read how another guy is coping with it, because guys tend to take advice from guys. And although most of them are sold to women, my guess, because they've got a man in their life, they have no idea how to help, and they're hoping the book will be. And it is a manual. It's a mental mechanics manual. It's got all kinds of suggestions and research and exercises and to help people get through a wide variety of things.
And what was the name of the book again?
Guts, Grit, and the Grind, a mental mechanics manual.
Guts, Grit, and the Grime. A mental. I'll check that one out. I could use it. All right. Well,
Yeah,
thanks a lot for being. Yeah, thanks for
yeah.
being on the show.
My pleasure, man. Glad we could make that connection.